Hi, this is Outlaw Bookseller, and I thought today we'd have a look at some of my J.G. Ballard collection, because I've done a couple of Ballard videos about Deep Ends, the anthology that I'm occasionally involved with. So I thought we'd take a look at the books today, because people have really enjoyed the Moorcock ones, and of course there was a strong association and friendship between Ballard and Moorcock, centred around New Worlds, and also so they were very friendly socially as well. So I thought we'd have a look at that. And today we're going to look at the Demy format titles in my Ballard collection and the Royals. There are some octavos, some smaller ones, mostly published by Jonathan Cape. We'll have a look at those another time. So I'm just going to move this copy of William Burroughs' Queer out of the way. Interesting association there, because of course Burroughs was a major inspiration rather than an influence over Ballard. And I'll move this Angela Carter, somebody else who is sort of a related figure. And some of these are first, some are not. I came to Ballard in the early 80s, and obviously he's always been very collectible, and it's quite hard to get the early ones unless you can spend the money. So this is what, I'm just going to pop this out a moment. This is what's often described as his first novel, which is The Drowned World. Now this is a Liverite anniversary edition published a few years ago, and basically the 50th anniversary edition, as it says. And you know, it's often described as his first novel, but of course it isn't his first novel. His first novel was The Wind from Nowhere. Now if you're a Ballard fan, you probably know this story, but I'll recount it anyway. Ballard had obviously published lots of short stories between the late 50s and the early 60s, and he wanted to make the transition to full-time writing as a job, and he'd been editing technical journals and doing stuff like that. And he got an advance to write a short book for an American publisher called The Wind from Nowhere. And he wrote The Wind from Nowhere in a 2-week holiday from work, and that earned him enough money to quit work and sit down and write the book he wanted to write, which of course was The Drowned World. Now there was never a hardcover edition of The Wind from Nowhere. He has suppressed it. His literary executives seem to be continue suppressing it, so there isn't another edition. The last time it was in print there was a Penguin from the 70s, which I'll show you another time, which is a Bruce Pelham cover. The Drowned World is also important in that if you have the first edition, it was a Gollancz yellow jacket, and of course even though Gollancz had done books in yellow jackets for a long time, and they had done some SF, just try and angle this so there's not too much of a glare on the sort of jacket I've got on there. You know, they'd done SF before and they'd done books in yellow jackets, but The Drowned World was really the time where they sort of took hold of science fiction and made a real commitment to publishing it in the UK in hardcover in those plain jackets with different sort of typography each time. And The Drowned World was the first of these, so it's really, really important. So that sort of really started Gollancz yellow jacket SF off at big time. Let's say this is Liverite, American publisher. They did some nice trade paperbacks at the same time as this, and introduction by Martin Amis, who of course Kingsley was an occasional friend of Ballard's. And Martin Amis, you know, he's known for being this social novelist and sort of literary bad boy, but he's a big SF fan in his youth. He knows his SF. And of course he wrote that science fiction film Saturn III, which isn't great, but you know, it's a good Saturday afternoon pot boiler if you want to watch a robot film with Kirk Douglas, Farrah Fawcett and Harvey Keitel, who's quite strange in it. So that's a little side reference there to more typical skiffy as opposed to the new wave wonders of Ballard. And of course The Drowned World is seen as prescient because of the whole global warming thing. It's also considered the first of his environmental trilogy, when of course it's actually the second. So that's The Drowned World. And this edition's rather nice. It's out of print, of course. They didn't print that many of those. If you pick it up, obviously it's a lot cheaper than getting the Gollancz original. So I know Rick, my editor at Deep Ends, has got an amazing collection. It's called the Terminal Collection. Hopefully he'll film them one day for posterity. They are online, I think, on his website. And around about the time I started in book selling, late 84, Ballard was really coming to his own, because he just published Empire of the Sun, and because it was a mainstream novel, it was getting lots of attention. So there were lots of reissues of his work, both from Gollancz and Cape, and these are some of them, and they were mostly done and probably sold to libraries. That's The Voices of Time. And so let me just angle this again, because we're trying to get the lighting right. And you know, the thing with Ballard collections is they often got retitled and what have you, and you know, these days you can't get them. They're all included in a 2-volume paperback sort of omnibus thing, which I don't like. I kind of agree with Scott Bradfield in that I prefer collections to sort of collected works. I prefer sort of the stories which are selected by the author and the way they come out. So this is Voices of Time, and I got Ballard to sign a load of books to me when I met him, and I used to correspond with him at some point as well, which I'm sure I've mentioned before. And so there you go, and that's the Voices of Time, Gollancz 85. Now some of these are actually first. I think this is a first. Yeah, it is. It was first published in Great Britain 1963, that's the year I was born, as The Four-Dimensional Nightmare. So that would have been his first collection, and so this is a first thus, so that's slightly sort of different selection there. So that's rather uncommon these days, and so I bought that new. I think it was probably £8.95. Let's have a look. £10.95. They was £8.95. They put it up pretty quickly. Next to that is probably the seminal new wave science fiction short story collection, and probably the seminal new wave science fiction story, The Terminal Beach, which really, you know, sums up the aims and the direction the subgenre was going to go in. And well, funnily enough, there's a little Bruce Pelham cover card there. That's from the Penguin Science Fiction Postcards box set, and I've got that paperback as well. I've just tuck that in there. Absolutely beautiful. And of course, this is a reissue. It's not a first. It was Gollancz 64, reissued again 74. So you know, this isn't a first, but it's really, really beautiful stuff, and I really love these books, and I've read this time and time again. The Terminal Beach remains a favourite story, and it's also got the Drowned Giant, which I absolutely love. I love the Drowned Giant. Two of his best stories, I think. They're absolutely fantastic. So and there were two more at the same time. The Day of Forever, just going to pop that out there, and as you see, there's an automobile sort of getting buried in the sand of the drought, or possibly of Hello America. It sort of references the cover of that maybe. And let's see, I think maybe this one's a first. I know two of these are first, and again signed by JG, and 1967. This is the first hardcover edition, 1986. So it's a little bit later than I thought. So it was a Panther paperback in 67, and that is the first hardcover, the first thus hardcover of The Day of Forever. And there's some great stuff in there, obviously. And it's, you know, these sort of books, you don't get reissues like this anymore in hardcover. It hardly ever happens. And it's got the wonderful story, the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, considered as a downhill motor race, which of course references Alfred Jarry's similar story about the crucifixion, which is referenced in the song Death Trap by Hawkwind. Robert Calvert references that in a sort of sideways way, and also in Silver Machine by Hawkwind as well, which is about you know, the downhill bike race is the way that Jarry, I think, talks about the crucifixion, which again makes you think of Moorcock and Behold the Man, you know, the time machine story where Carl Glogauer goes back in time and takes the place of the Christ. You know, it's quite sort of full-on stuff. So that's Day of Forever, first hardcover. And the fourth of these was The Venus Hunters, which is a particular favourite of mine. I really like the story of The Venus Hunters, and I wrote not a parody of it at all, but I wrote a short story called Saucer Occupant, which is in the 2019 edition of Deep Ends, which is my homage to The Venus Hunters. It's about UFOlogy. Ufology is kind of almost a taboo subject in SF. It's supposedly you couldn't really write about it, because science fiction readers, writers and fans didn't want to be associated with the sort of cranky UFO thing, but it never bothered me, I have to say. And that's a great story which is in here amongst others. And again, so I got all of these signed when I met JG, and I think that was from when I met him in around about 92 when Kindness of Women came out. And again, this is a first hardcover as well. So there's two first hardcovers here. So that's really, really nice. So those you don't see very often these days. If you see them, snap them up, and they're hard to get in good nick, of course, and always try to look after mine. We then jump forward a long way towards the end of Ballard's life and writing career, and this is his Hispanic set book Cocaine Nights, which was mentioned recently on the Right Around the World series of Richard E. Grant on BBC4, when they covered Spain, and they included this one. And I thought they should have covered Supercan instead, because I think Supercan's a better book, but this is a fantastic book as well. And I remember this came out towards the very end of the 90s, and let's see, and that's signed and dated. There you go, 19th of the 9th, 1996. So there you go, 96, that will come out. And great sort of book. And I'm not normally keen on shiny liveries, but I do like these. They're very sort of glitzy and hard and chromy and, you know, really fantastic. And as it says, a unique and profoundly original mind. That was JG for you. And a little while later, I was running a bookshop at the University of Bath, and one day I was talking to the publisher's rep from HarperCollins, a guy called Keith, great guy, great big bear of a man I haven't seen for years. I mentioned to Keith what a great job I thought that HarperCollins were doing of publishing and packaging Ballard's books. And he said, "Do you really think so?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "What do you?" He said, "Would you do me a favour? Would you send an email to Nick, who was his boss, and say, just tell him, because, you know, the people in the office, they don't hear any of this stuff." So I sent an email off to this chap Nick, and said, and basically said in print what I'd said to Keith. And apparently Nick had a word with Ballard, and Ballard said, "Oh yeah, you know, Steve has written to me, and I've met him." And he said, you know, make sure he gets a free copy of the new book. So I ended up with a free copy of Supercan, signed by the great man himself, which was lovely. That's a bookmark to promote my book 100 must-read science fiction novels, which came out in 2006. And Supercan is one of my choices. Now, you might say that Supercan isn't a science fiction novel, but I really wanted to get across the way that Ballard had changed SF and how he'd pulled it back towards the mainstream and meshed it and influenced so many writers on both sides of the divide. So I put that in there for iconoclasm. And I do think it's science fiction, because it's the science of the mind and how our consciousness has been changed by, you know, the endlessly contemporary postmodern world we live in. And also in here, there's a letter here I've got in JG's handwriting. So a little letter, I'll just show you that briefly. And this is for when I was editing a literary diary, and I was commissioning essays, and the theme of the diary was identity in literature. And Ballard was my first choices, and he wrote back and he said, "I'm sorry, so I'm too busy with my new book." And that's fair enough, you know. And I got Christopher Priest to do one, not as a substitute. I wanted them both. So that was sort of because to me Priest and Ballard are similar. And Priest is the closest you get to Ballard, even though he's quite different, and he was influenced JG. So that's really, really nice. And another thing that happened at that point was that Ballard's girlfriend Claire, who is the basis of the character Dr. Helen Remington in Crash, JG had said to her, "Look, you do this sort of open university summer school," because we used to have a summer school at the University of Bath, and people come on for a week on a residential thing. And he said to her, you know, when you go to the summer school at the University of Bath, drop in and see Steve and say hello to him and take him to lunch. And Claire dropped into the shop to see me. I was managing the shop, but unfortunately I didn't know that she was coming down, and I was on holiday, so I didn't get to go for lunch with the woman who inspired Helen Remington. I don't know if I've told that story before, but oh, what a shame. I was really, really frustrated with that. I know I told this story in the pages of Deep Ends. So there you go. So that's the stories around my sort of copy of Supercans. A little while after that, JG's last few works didn't hit me in the same way. This is Millennium People, which I've only read once, so I must read again. And this seemed more broadly comedic to me, and I wasn't so fussed on it, so I must go back to it and try it again. But, you know, the millennium is a word in everybody's lips then. And again, I think this is signed. Let's have a look. Yeah, signed again. It's actually a signed book plate there, which so I must have got this from Waterstones at some point. And that's 2003, so I must go back to that. It's hard to believe how long ago that is. So there's some Ballard editions in Demy. If you bear with me, I'm just going to sort of grab some of the royals, but I've just noticed a book here which is Ballard related. This is The Hospital Ship by Dr. Martin Bax, who was a paediatrician. And Martin Bax Used to be involved with a magazine called Ambit, which is still going. I have seen it on sale recently. It's a poetry and prose and fiction magazine. And this is Jonathan Cape, hence the beautiful jacket. I absolutely love Cape books from this period. And this is a science fiction novel, a very, very strange one. It was also in Picador. And it has a different cover. I'll show you that in another video. And funnily enough, the background picture of the Picador one was also used on an album by Judas Priest called Sin After Sin, one of my favourite heavy metal bands. So strange sort of connection there. There is Martin, looking quite Ballardian in his own way. So that's a connection there. And you know, I also noticed there's a Barrington Bailey. Barrington Bailey, of course, wrote for New Worlds. So you know, there's a kind of sort of vague connection there as well. So just to sort of have a look at the Royal, so I'll just reach over to another shelf. You're probably seeing there's other things by people like Greg Bear, and yeah, here we go. Empire of the Sun, which of course was the commercial breakthrough for JG. Critically, he'd been the man for a long time, but of course he had to write a mainstream novel before the broadsheets would really give him what he deserved. I lost faith really in the Booker Prize when Ballard didn't win it and Anita Bruckner did. And funny enough, when Anita Bruckner died, I mean, I think she wrote about 20 odd novels, and they were all out of print apart from 3, and yet all of Ballard's were in print except for The Wind from Nowhere. And I think that sort of said more about Ballard's relevance in the contemporary world, though Bruckner's work has come back into print. But it was a great shame for me as a young bookseller. I wanted to see something radical and interesting and truly literary win the award, and it went to a fairly sort of conventional novel, which is a shame. But this isn't a first. This is actually about a 3rd or a 4th printing, and again I got it signed, and there's an Empire of the Sun bookmark from back in the day, and I remember giving these away across the counter, shortlisted for the Booker Prize, £8.95. Look at that. And that iconic jacket. And I remember I was working at Bows and Bows in Bath in '85 in the summer when this came out in paperback, because this was '84, and I remember we ordered 50 copies of it in an A format paperback. So if you want to know what A format size is, that's an A format paperback. And it was great. But I think we sold 500 of the Anita Bruckner, so it was a sheep and goats thing. So that's Empire of the Sun, and quotes on the back from Graham Greene and Angela Carter. Now, funnily enough, Angela, who I mentioned briefly earlier on, was my favourite living female writer, contemporary writer at that time, and that's a reissue of The Bloody Chamber from Gollancz, also from around about that time. And she, at one point, lived literally around the corner from the bookshop I was working in when I first moved to Bath, a matter of 2 minutes walk. She only lived there for a couple of years in the 70s, but there was a local connection there as well, and she was very much regarded as somebody who was on the edge of being an SF writer, and she had a story in the first issue of Interzone. So she was kind of the female equivalent for me of people like Ballard and Moorcock, and she died sadly of cancer very young at the age of 52, and I never got to meet her, and I always wanted to. And she was a bit more culty then, and now she is the most studied British female contemporary author at universities, and has been for about 20 years. Great shame. She was a really good writer. She really had something special. So moving on, an interesting one for the Ballard readership was the book which came out after Empire of the Sun, because what's he going to do now? And this is The Day of Creation, and lovely jacket that I think is absolutely fantastic, really beautiful. It looks like Michael Foreman. I'm just going to look inside, see who did it. Does it tell us who the cover artist is? It's by Paul Wright. Yeah, it's not quite Michael Foreman, but it's in that sort of watercolor ballpark, and really beautiful. And it's an unusual novel, this. It's a very strange one. So there are echoes of the drowned world, and there's echoes of the crystal world. It's about a river which suddenly springs out of nowhere in Africa. But such a beautiful book. And I think I got Ballard to sign this for me in '92. But he was greeted with a certain amount of confusion at the time, because I think people thought they'd get another Empire of the Sun or something of that ilk, and of course they didn't. It's good to upset expectations of the bourgeois reader. I always think that's a good thing, and Ballard was great at that. This is Running Wild, part of the Hutchinson novella series, and I think these came out in the early 90s, and they're very handsome books. And I'm just trying to get this angled right because we have such a glare here. And yeah, really nice. And there's The main character in this was in a short story called The Object of the Attack, which appeared originally in Interzone. And these Hutchinson novellas, really, really nice books. It's a little bit spine faded. There were lots of these. They commissioned loads of them. It's got really nice creamy end papers there. And they weren't, I mean, there's the oldest one I've got called Ruins, which is really good. There were others, and they've got illustrations by Janet Woolley, and that's signed. And they're sort of Ballard's first steps really into, you know, the sort of slightly crime fiction narrative that you get in things like Cocaine Nights and Supercan. So it's a really example of that. And, you know, lovely, lovely book that. As you see, the sort of material I use makes glare happen constantly, which is an absolute pain when you're trying to film, but you've got to keep these things nice, haven't you? So there we go. So there's a bit more Ballard in Royal. One of my favourite collections from JG's work is War Fever, and of course, you know, because these got collected into big omnibuses later on, some of them didn't have much of a lifespan as original collections, and War Fever is from the 90s, and it's got a very 90s cover, that, and again signed HarperCollins, fantastic stuff, or Collins as they still were then. And what I love about this is this has got some really original short stories in it. The Object of the Attack is in there. Answers to a Questionnaire, which I think is fantastic, which is just answers to a questionnaire. You never see the questions, just the answers, and you get this sort of portrait of a strange figure who's completing it. And also The Enormous Space, which was filmed by the BBC with Anthony Sher. I think the title was Home. I've got that somewhere on VHS. I taped off the TV at the time. I don't think it's ever been commercially released. And you've also got The Index, which is the index of a biography of, again, a mysterious person. And through reading the index of this biography, which you don't get to see, you get this picture of this rather strange quasi-iconic figure who knew everybody. Really, really interesting stuff. So if you can ever see this one, pick it up. Great collection, War Fever. And there's JG looking very sort of urbane on the back there, as he always was. Jerry Bower, I think, did that picture. Classic stuff. Really sort of you know, sophisticated man of the arts as we think of him. I'm sure in one of these I've got sort of a larger sort of version of that photograph, so bear with me and maybe we'll come across it. Shortly after War Fever, we had what was sold as the sequel to Empire of the Sun, which is The Kindness of Women. And I remember going to a Ballard signing for this at the Watershed in Bristol, which is kind of art centre and cinema. And it was interesting because the audience was, there were 3 tranches of people in the audience. They were kind of blue rinsers, sort of old school sort of readers who'd read Empire of the Sun, and they knew this was a sequel. I think they were expecting something quite conventional. There were young kids who were studying Empire of the Sun for their A-levels, which to me seemed like a really radical idea at the time, because, you know, the book was so new. I'd had to do things like George Eliot, lucky them. And there was the Ballard fans, who were mostly sort of clad in black and intense young men. And JG did this wonderful thing where I'd read the book in proof form. I'd gone to the head office of the bookshop company I worked for at the time. I used to do that once a month, and talk to my boss there, John, who now runs Unbound and has a very famous book podcast. And I had a proof copy, and I was reading it on the train, and it was sort of great to sort of read a new Ballard. And so this copy I didn't actually read till long afterwards. And at the event, Ballard was so nice. He was so self-effacing, you know, and signed this and what have you. He started by saying that he was going to do a reading, and he read the bit about the one time he took LSD, and he said in his plummy voice, "This is about the one time I took acid, and I really wouldn't recommend it to anybody. Terrible experience." And, you know, the sort of blue rinsers, they were kind of like taken aback. But, you know, it's a wonderful book. It really is a wonderful, warm book. And there's the great man again in that Jerry Bower shot. You know, if you're going to have a Royal, do it this nicely. That's what I say. I mean, Royal is probably my least favourite format of hardcover book. I prefer Demy over everything, but they really are very, very handsome, these HarperCollins ones. So, and that was one reason why I said to the rep, you know, they're doing such a great job of publishing his books. Another one from the early 90s. Is Rushing to Paradise, and that's from '94, And I mean, that sort of has environmentalist theme. It has the theme of a female sort of Germaine Greer type, Attenborough type media figure who's concerned about the environment. A young boy gets involved with her, and you know, you get sort of echoes of the great island novels set on islands like Lord of the Flies, and I know Ballard was very fond a few years later of The Beach by Alex Garland. I love books set on islands myself. I think they've really got something, and obviously there's echoes of the Terminal Beach in there, and really, really beautiful stuff. And yet another signed JG there. That's the publication date, September 94. Absolutely lovely, great book. And that's very sort of terse, harsh, astringent book, I always felt. Finally today we look at what was Ballard's last novel, sadly, Kingdom Come, which again I didn't think was one of the strongest ones. And you know, when writers do their last book, of course they don't usually know it's going to be their last book, and you don't know whether if they knew, whether they'd pull out the stuff to do something different. It's not a bad book by any means, but it's just not one of my favourites. And I think, I'm not sure if this one's signed or not, but no, that one's not signed. I couldn't get that one signed. It's published by Fourth Estate, which is part of HarperCollins, but quite a striking volume, that. And The Suburbs Dream of Violence, look at that on the back. That's a great little message there. So there's kind of tie-ins to Millennium People and Crash and what have you. Shopping malls, the sort of ring road, is it the M25 that runs around London, the sort of thing Ian Sinclair gets excited about, the whole psychogeographical thing. So there we go. But what an amazing oeuvre. I mean, what can you say about a writer like this who just, you know, continuous iconoclasm, inventiveness. He changed the genre he came out of. He made it something different. You know, he's generally regarded as the finest English novelist of the latter half of the 20th century. And yet today he seems to be almost forgotten as a science fiction writer. And I think it's time that young science fiction readers, particularly not aware of him, need to pick up his works and read them, and as they are really, really important. And brilliant, and when you met him, he's a lovely man, you know. And people have this vision, because of the books about car crashes and high rises and all the violence and eroticism, that he would be this strange mad figure. But he was, you know, he was like a doctor, a dentist, an architect. He looked like a middle-class professional, and he was a really great guy to talk to, and very, very warm and kind. So this is Outlaw Bookseller. There'll be more Ballard to come. Signing out for now, and be careful when you're walking through those underpasses.